Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. So with that said, people, there is no more time to waste. Let's get into it. Let's jump into it. And as I said, I was going to lead with this Clemson Florida State story anyway. And then Dabo Swinney just took a whole bucket of kerosene, lit a match, blew it up, put it on fire, and has everybody talking about what is going on with the situation at Clemson and Florida State. And so, like I said, I want to backtrack and kind of explain what happened, give you both sides' perspectives, but then tell you, frankly, why I do agree with Dabo Swinney. So to backtrack, it was kind of crazy because for those of you who do follow me on Instagram, you know, every Saturday morning I wake up, I do a quick video, put it up on Instagram, giving out my college football picks for the day. And so I get up to do that on Saturday morning, probably about, 6 o'clock Pacific time, 6:30 Pacific time. And kind of out of the corner of my eye, I see Florida State is trending on Twitter. And I said, that's weird. They stink. They're not very good. I wonder why they're trending. And so obviously I click a couple links and I read a couple stories. And essentially what it really boils down to is this. And I'll take you to the end and then we'll work back our way through it. Essentially, Florida State and Clemson were supposed to play noon Eastern on Saturday. And at the last minute, Florida State pulled out. And what it really boiled down to was that Clemson had one player who ended up testing positive after traveling with the team. Florida State did not believe that it was safe to play Clemson, even though that player wasn't going to play. Clemson, and this was something Dabo Swinney talked about on Sunday, literally offered every single alternative that they possibly could. We'll stay an extra day. We'll play on Sunday. We'll play on Monday. We'll test a bunch more. We'll make sure all our guys are safe. And Florida State just said flat out, no, we're not going to play. The ACC, to a degree, got involved. For people who don't understand, the conference cannot make a team play, but Clemson essentially did pass the protocols to play. Obviously, the kid who tested positive would not have played, but under the ACC guidelines, under the ACC rules, Clemson was eligible to play. They wanted to play, and Florida State just said flat out it's not safe. So the ACC puts out this very vaguely worded statement that basically says the two sides got on a conference call to discuss medicals. One side did not feel safe, and so the game will not be played. And so you know what happens from there. Immediately, the Clemson fans, Florida State's totally ducking us. What are they afraid of? Florida State fans, it's abundance of caution. We have to be safe. And of course, every story, there's kind of a meeting in the middle. And so let's kind of explain why it happened, how it happened, and why, frankly, Dabo Swinney was so mad. So what you have to understand is going into this game, first of all, Clemson had a player, as I mentioned, who tested positive. The way that I understand it is Clemson traditionally tests 3 times a week. They test on usually Sunday, Wednesday, and then Friday. But this particular week, because it was a bye week, they actually tested Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This kid showed some symptoms early in the week of potentially being sick. He did not fail a COVID test, though, on Monday. He did not fail it on Wednesday. And to take it a step further, Clemson went above and beyond and gave him an extra test on Thursday, which he did not test positive for COVID either. So he gets on the plane Friday having 3 negative COVID tests over the course of the week and takes the Friday test with the rest of the team. By the time they land, they realize this kid has tested positive. So they obviously do what any logical team would do. They immediately quarantine him. My understanding is, they would have quarantined anybody that was considered a close contact. But according to what Clemson said, the way that they travel, there are no close contacts. And I think that sounds like it could be crazy, but I think it could make sense, right? I mean, John Calipari at Kentucky was talking about this the other day. They all wear monitors around the building to make sure that nobody's in contact with anybody else. Clemson said that when they travel, they keep people at a distance so nobody is around anybody else. So it is possible, in theory, that while this kid tested positive, no one else would have been exposed to the virus from him. And then to reiterate, Clemson basically said once they got to Tallahassee, look, we're willing to do whatever it takes to just get this game in. We came all the way down here. We're ready to play. And again, to reiterate what I said a minute ago, they said, we'll stay till Sunday, we'll stay till Monday, we'll test again, whatever. And Florida State just flat out refused. And so from Florida State's perspective, I think it is logical as to why you would say that they wanted to cancel the game. Clemson brought a player who tested positive. He was symptomatic through the course of the week. Who knows if he could spread it to anybody? And, we just don't feel comfortable playing. It is, in theory and in actuality, and in defense of Florida State, it is, relatively speaking, a legitimate concern, okay? For the 1,000th time, I've said it all since probably May, June, July. Don't ever want to undersell the seriousness of this. Don't ever want to undersell the seriousness of the virus. I know people who have had it. You guys know people who have had it. Some of us know people who have gotten very, very, very sick. But we also have to talk about in actuality and in reality. And I do understand the Clemson fan that is saying, kind of feels like Florida State was trying to duck us. And frankly, what Dabo said was just that Florida State was trying to duck us. And the reason why is very simply this. And I think there's a few things that you need to understand. First of all, I saw a lot of people on social media, how do you let a player who's symptomatic test positive? How do you let him practice all week? Because he tested negative multiple times. When you say he was symptomatic, what that means is that he had cold and flu-like symptoms during the course of cold and flu season. He probably had a stuffy nose. He probably had a sore throat. Whatever. But he was testing negative for COVID. And so to say that Clemson should have pulled him out of practice because he showed symptoms, to quote Angelina from Jersey Shore, hello? Remember that scene? If you don't, here it is.
Hello? Are you stupid? They're taking their underwear off in the jacuzzi. Are you dumb? Hello?
How'd you like that? That was pretty good, huh? But anyway, I'm getting off topic here with Clemson. Hello? You can't, and this is like something that no one understands at the most basic level. You can't simply pull out every single person who has any symptoms of COVID if they're testing negative. This is something that I've tried to hammer home to you guys in this audience, and I appreciate you guys letting me get on my high horse and talk about it, but I do think it's important. We want to keep student athletes safe. We don't want anybody to get sick. In a perfect world, no one would get sick. But if we're going to start pulling out people who show symptoms that are not positive, we will not have a college sports season, okay? College football will be done. If we pull people out of practice or don't allow them to play who have symptoms of COVID but are not testing positive, we are not going to have seasons. You cannot have a season when you pull a kid out who has a runny nose, who has a sore throat. Those are symptoms of lots of different viruses that are spread throughout this time of year. And so to me, I don't blame Clemson for letting him practice. I don't blame Clemson for bringing him when he had tested not only did he test negative twice, they did an extra test to make sure that he was negative. They gave him an extra test on Thursday, which he passed, and at some point he got the virus on Friday. And so he gets to Florida State. Florida State refuses to play, and I think what we have to do is separate two things, right? We have to separate the fact from, yes, we want all of our athletes to be safe. We have to separate that from the standard that Florida State set on Saturday. And the standard that Florida State set on Saturday is that if anyone tests positive under any circumstances, under any conditions, we're not playing. And I think that's a very scary standard to set when we're talking about a college basketball season where you're talking about a college football season where we still have 2-3 weeks left, and you have a college basketball season where, guess what? People are going to be in the air. People are going to be on the road, and we can't shut down every time somebody tests positive. And so what I want you to think about, and what I really am trying to wrap my head around, is essentially what Florida State canceled this game over. Florida State canceled this game over this very simply. Clemson had a player test positive. Florida State canceled under the premise that this guy who didn't test positive till Friday, even though he wasn't within 6 feet, even though they properly social distanced, even though they traveled in the safest manner possible, that this kid could still have not only given the virus to somebody else, but then that player would then give it to players on Florida State. So we're now talking about 3 degrees of separation. By the way, that doesn't even factor in to the idea that if somebody at Florida State gets it, guess what? You quarantine them, you isolate them, they're going to be fine. I'm not trying to undersell this virus, but with the medical treatment that these kids have, none of them are going to have serious short-term, long-term, whatever consequences from this whole deal. They're not. We have the proof. We've been doing this for 5 months. As best I can tell, there is not a single college athlete that was under the medical supervision of their team doctors who has even been hospitalized from this virus. I'm not talking about death. I'm talking about hospitalized. Not a single one. Somebody tried to tell me about some guy at Utah, some Utah football player that got hospitalized. Google it. The kid was not with the team. The kid either opted out of the season, quit, is in between semesters, whatever. He's not with the team who got hospitalized. And so I bring this up because that is the worst case scenario. But essentially what I'm saying is exactly what I just said a minute ago. Florida State canceled under the premise that a bunch of guys who tested negative on Friday may have caught the virus from one person. By the way, and that's the other thing too, and I'm sorry I keep changing the subject and changing directions, but there's so much nuance to this story that I want to make sure that everybody understands every detail. This is not like what has happened at other places. And I'm not the type of person that has said we have to play through every positive test and all that stuff. I brought up the example a few weeks ago of LSU. I brought up the example of the reason the Alabama game was canceled was because they had a ton of positive tests. Players weren't healthy enough to play, and so they shouldn't play. It sucks. I love LSU-Bama. It's one of the best games on the schedule every year. But LSU couldn't play, and they had enough positive tests where they really would have put Alabama at risk. But what we're talking about with Florida State is a couple things. Is one, we're talking about one positive test at Clemson. Then we're talking about a bunch of players that were socially distanced from him maybe catching the virus, even though it's very unlikely based on the way that they travel, the way that they test. Nobody tested positive, and I know it can stay in your system for a little while before you test positive. I get that. But we're talking about that, and then we're talking about then giving it to a Florida State player. And so I do understand why Dabo Swinney was so upset. I do understand why Clemson was so upset. And then I'll take it a step further as to what I said a minute ago. It's not just that we're talking about Florida State canceling a game over one player testing positive who then may give it to a teammate who may give it to a Florida State player. We're talking about Florida State canceling when by ACC protocols, the league would sign off on that game. The league said that it was safe to move forward. And on top of that, Clemson was willing to stay an extra day or two, and Florida State still said no. And Clemson was not only willing to stay an extra day or two, but from everything I'm reading, they're willing to do extra tests, they're willing to do extra everything, and Florida State just flat out refused. And so I bring this up because on Sunday, with all that as a context, Dabo went off. And I'm going to read his quotes from David Hale. I believe he works at ESPN. And what Dabo said, here's a couple things that Dabo said, and then I'll get back into my point, is that Dabo said this game was not canceled because of COVID. COVID was just an excuse to cancel the game. To me, Florida State's administration forfeited the game. Then Dabo was asked about playing the game again. We were there, he said. We were ready. We met the standards to play. In my opinion, they forfeited the game. That's $300,000 that's gone out the window. And then he said, as a follow-up, which I thought was really interesting, that this has happened before throughout the season on both sides. There was a really good story from The Athletic that explained that Clemson had a similar situation earlier in the year where they traveled to a game, somebody tested positive, but the ACC said that it was safe to play, and they proceeded with the game. Dabo also used the example of Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence tests positive in the middle of the week. Boston College doesn't back out of the game. And Boston College ends up playing and coming to campus even though Trevor Lawrence tested positive. And so Dabo's quotes, first of all, were crazy. And I give him a ton of credit for a few different reasons. The first is love him or hate him, agree or disagree. We ask our athletes, we ask our coaches, we ask our people in sports to be honest, to tell it like it is. And Dabo said what he truly believes. And I've already seen a bunch of media members crushing him and, who does he think he is and why would he say what he said? He truly believes it. Don't be a hypocrite. If you want our athletes to be candid and outspoken, you got to take it when you don't like what they have to say. 2, I think he said something that is really important. And I think what it goes back to is what I was saying a minute ago, is I think that Florida State set a really bad precedent for the whole college sports landscape as a whole. Because essentially what Florida State said was very simply this. If it is not 100% safe to play, if it is not 0 tests across the board on both teams, 0 positive tests, we are not going to play. And I think in theory, in a perfect world where candy canes rain down from the sky and everybody's happy and healthy and the sun's always shining, that sounds great. But what I can tell you, that is not reality. That is not reality for where we are going, and the current landscape of sports in general. And it goes back to what I've said for the past probably 5 or 6 weeks when it comes to college basketball. We're talking about college basketball programs traveling across the country, charter flights, staying in hotels, going from place to place. And these schools, just like in football, are doing everything that they can to keep players safe. But we also have to understand that this is a virus. It is cold and flu season. I hate for the people that agree with me, I hate to keep hammering home this point, but I think it is so important for us to use common sense. I'm not saying that this virus isn't dangerous. I'm not saying that no one can get sick, that no one can get really sick. But what I am saying is that you cannot live in a world where we completely eliminate this virus and that we're not going to do anything or play anything unless it's 100% clean. Because if that's the case, we're not getting in college basketball season. I'm just telling you right now, we're not getting in college basketball season. College football is going to be a real struggle. I am just telling you. And I bring all this up because I think 2 things. I think I think most people, and I tweeted this on Sunday, and of course people got mad, but I don't really care. Who cares? Whatever. Most people in college sports agree with Dabo. Maybe they don't agree Florida State should forfeit. Maybe they don't agree that Florida State, whatever. But what they agree is that these protocols are so absurd. And that, yes, we are going to do everything that we can to keep our kids safe. We're going to do everything we can to keep them healthy, but that we can't eliminate this virus. Not right now, not without a vaccine, and we can't stop the world until we do. And so what Dabo essentially said was, like, come on, man. Like, we got down to Florida State. We did everything that we could possibly have been asked to do to figure out a way to play this game, and we can't live in a world where we're waiting around for the perfect moment where there are 0 positives and we can play this game. That world doesn't exist. That world is not going to exist, at least until we get a vaccine, and frankly, probably much further. Because without trying to sound like a vaccine expert, I don't think everybody's going to be able to get a vaccine the first day it's available. And so what Dabo was essentially saying was like, come on, man. We flew down. 1 positive. We travel safely. We test regularly. We tested this kid 3 times before he tested positive. We will stay an extra day or 2 to get this game in, but you got to meet us somewhere in the middle. We're giving 100% and you're giving 0. We'll give you 90. We'll take 90 and give you the last 10. We'll stay an extra day. The ACC said it's okay. You have to be willing to do something that's not cancel anytime anyone tests positive. And I will say, so let me even paraphrase before I get out of here. I don't want to say that Florida State definitively did not play and used 1 positive COVID test as an excuse not to play. I am not going to sit here and say that at this moment in time because I don't know. And maybe it is, quote unquote, out of an abundance of caution that we have decided that Florida State is not going to play this game. But what I can tell you definitively is that there are a lot of people in college sports, and I'm telling you, I'm not doing the cool reporter thing, I talk to people in college sports. I'm telling you because this is what they are telling me. And I think it's important for you guys to know what is being said behind those four walls because most guys don't have the cachet that Dabo does. Most guys can't say whatever they want to say. But there are a lot of people in college sports that really do believe that schools are using COVID as an excuse to get out of stuff that they don't want to do. I'm not saying Florida State did it. But I could see the argument from someone like Dabo who believes that. Same thing a few weeks ago with Wisconsin. If you remember, Wisconsin, when they had their outbreak of positive tests, it took out their starting quarterback, their second-string quarterback, their head coach, and they just decided we're not going to play. And it was out of an abundance of caution. And what did Nebraska say? Nebraska fans went crazy on social media. They were like, dude, you're passing the Big Ten protocols. You have the minimum number of players. Nebraska fans were like, we think you just don't want to play with your fourth-string quarterback and without your head coach. Now, I can't speak to what happened behind the walls at Wisconsin. I don't know. But what I can tell you definitively is that there are people across college sports that think teams and schools are going to try to get out of stuff or are trying to get out of stuff and using COVID as an excuse. I'll give you another example. There's one school in college basketball, Baylor, you probably heard, had a couple positive COVID tests excuse me. Scott Drew, the Baylor coach, tested positive for COVID on Sunday, I guess it was. Number 2 team in the country. They travel to Mohegan Sun in my home state of Connecticut to play this week. They play Arizona State on Wednesday, I think, and they play Villanova on Thursday, or vice versa, whatever. But I bring it up because when the Scott Drew news came across my feed, first of all, great news. Scott Drew's asymptomatic, whatever. I think in his statement he said, I can't believe it. I had no idea I got it. But somebody reached out to me in college basketball, not from Baylor, not from Villanova, not from whatever, and they said, I wonder if, because Baylor is planning on still going to Mohegan Sun and still playing. They tested their players before they left. They're going to test them when they get to Mohegan Sun. Somebody texted me and was like, dude, if you had Baylor, the number 2 team on your schedule, and you don't want to play them, you could use this as an excuse. Well, I don't know. Scott Drew has it. Somebody else could have it. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen. What I am saying is that it could happen, and it would be an excuse, and you could use it as an excuse, and nobody could really call you out. And so I'm done talking about this. I'm over it. I want to talk about some of the actual games. But I bring all this up because I think this is a really important inflection point. I think it could go either way from this point. I think it could go either way from this perspective. I think it could go either way from the perspective that either Dabo gets crushed, and, listen, certain people are going to crush Dabo, right? Oh, how could he say that? But I'm telling you, that's how people are talking behind the scenes. There's a lot of people in football that think Florida State punked out of their game against Clemson. But is it a good thing where Dabo Swinney finally spoke out and maybe people start to reconsider the absurdity that one player from Clemson tested positive? They were willing to wait 2 days. If everybody else tests negative, they play, and Florida State refused? Are they willing to admit that Dabo is right, that a world where we're waiting for 0 positive COVID cases ever isn't going to exist, and that Florida State overstepped their bounds by canceling this game? Or did Florida State just set a precedent, like I said, you don't like the matchup, you're on national TV, you could get embarrassed, the league signed off and said it's okay to play, but you know what, they had 1 single positive COVID, so we're going to cancel. I don't know, but I think that Florida State set a really bad precedent, and I do think that it's really important that Dabo Swinney called them out. All right, man. I can't believe I just did 26 minutes on Dabo and Florida State. But listen, I'll say this. I do think it's a really, really, really important topic. I think it's a really important topic to have a conversation about because, like I said, there are a lot of people that think a precedent was set and the wrong precedent was set by what what Florida State did, and I'm glad Dabo said it. So that's it. What I think I'm going to do is this, guys. This topic got me really fired up. Really fired up, huge topic, whatever. This is what I think I'm going to do. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back. I'm going to take my break now. I've been doing that take a break thing. I'm going to come back now. I'm going to come back, and what I'm going to do is just talk about the football stuff, right? I'm going to talk about a little bit about Indiana, Ohio State. I'll talk about Penn State. Maybe do a quick playoff top 3, top 5, and then we will get into the Auburn stuff. I don't think Auburn is necessarily a mega topic, but I do think it's worth mentioning. We'll get to it at the end, but I'll just take my break now. I'm lucky. Just take the break now. I will be back in a little bit to talk Indiana,